When we think of pirates, we often imagine flamboyantly dressed outlaws, armed with pistols and cutlasses, sailing the turquoise waters of the Caribbean, with the Jolly Roger flying high. Movies and modern media, especially the Pirates of the Caribbean franchise, have made this image iconic and unforgettable. But while we love the adventure, the truth is far more complex and, arguably, far more interesting. These pirates were not just fictional heroes or simple bandits. They were products of geopolitical warfare, economic instability, and the brutal reality of the New World. In this video, we are going deep into the historical records to explore the real story behind the Pirates of the Caribbean, who they truly were, why piracy emerged in the first place, and how the great age of Caribbean buccaneering eventually came to an end. It's a story of empire, revolution, and surprisingly democratic outlaws. The roots of Caribbean piracy actually begin not with the pirates themselves, but with a massive shift in global power that happened after the European discovery of the Americas in the late 15th century. Spain, having bankrolled Columbus, quickly became the dominant power in the New World, controlling vast territories and extracting enormous wealth. We're talking about tons of gold and silver pouring in from mines in Peru and Mexico, alongside incredibly valuable commodities like sugar, tobacco, and cocoa. By the 16th century, massive Spanish treasure fleets, the famous silver fleets, regularly crossed the Atlantic, carrying these riches back to Seville. This incredible influx of wealth from the Americas financed the Spanish Empire and made it the wealthiest and most powerful nation in Europe. But this growing wealth created massive jealousy and tension. France, England, and the Netherlands, especially after the Protestant Reformation, opposed Spain, both politically and religiously. Instead of fighting incredibly costly wars against Spain on European soil, these rivals realized they could strike a blow by targeting Spain's weaker, yet incredibly valuable, overseas possessions and shipping lanes. The thinking was simple. Why fight the Spanish army when you can steal the silver that pays for it? And that the stage was set for piracy to become a central feature of the Caribbean landscape. At first, though piracy was often technically legal, governments realized they could outsource their naval warfare, saving money and denying any direct responsibility. They issued what were called letters of marque, essentially legal permission slips that allowed private individuals called privatas to attack and seize the ships of enemy nations. French privateers dominated early raids, harassing Spanish shipping and setting the precedent for legalized plunder. Later, English figures, backed by Queen Elizabeth I, rose to prominence during wars with Spain. Men like the legendary Sir Francis Drake and Sir Walter Raleigh. Drake, in particular, was a superstar pirate to the English. However, these early privateers were basically just raiders. They lacked permanent Caribbean bases and usually sailed back to Europe when their mission was complete. In response, Spain heavily armed its treasure fleets and strengthened its coastal defenses, making casual privateering increasingly difficult and dangerous. This brings us to the true origins of the classic Caribbean pirate. By the early 17th century, small groups of French settlers and others began living on the isolated western parts of Hispaniola, the island now shared by Haiti and the Dominican Republic. They survived mainly by hunting the abundant wild cattle and pigs, and then selling the smoked meat and hides. They used an Arawak method of smoking meat over a slow fire called a bouc. This gave them their unique name, the Buccaneers. Spain, viewing them as illegal squatters and nuisances, repeatedly sent forces to drive them out and destroy the wild herds they relied on. Eventually, these attacks forced the Buccaneers to flee to the nearby, small, and easily defensible island of Tortuga, just off the coast. By around 1630, driven by the loss of their legitimate living and united by a strong, shared hatred of Spain, the Buccaneers decided to turn fully to the sea and embrace piracy as a way of life. Tortuga soon transformed from a refuge into the first a haven where anyone could get supplies and find a captain eager to plunder Spanish ships. Once established, these buccaneers called themselves the Brethren of the Coast, and they developed surprisingly sophisticated and even democratic forms of social organization. Even more importantly, they created written articles of conduct, often called the Pirate Code, that everyone had to sign and agree to, with the captain usually getting only a slightly larger share than the most experienced sailors. Could easily be removed by a vote if they were deemed cowardly or and the articles always included a fixed scale of compensation for injuries suffered during the voyage, a kind of early insurance plan, offering a radical alternative to the rigid, class-based hierarchies of European naval life. Many joined the pirates because it offered opportunity, freedom, and a form of social mobility that simply didn't exist anywhere else. As the 17th century progressed, the political landscape shifted again. In 1655, the English successfully captured Jamaica from the Spanish, and the capital, Port Royal, became the new, massive hub for privateering and, increasingly, outright piracy. The English crown openly welcomed these buccaneers, knowing they were the best defense against Spanish attacks. Morgan wasn't just a ship attacker. He was a brilliant military strategist. Between 1668 and 1671, Morgan led devastating, coordinated attacks not just on ships, but on major Spanish cities like Portobello, Maracaibo, and, most famously, Panama City. His raids were incredibly successful, bringing in vast amounts of wealth and fundamentally weakening Spanish control. But here is the bizarre twist. Despite his brutality and widespread crimes, Morgan was later rewarded for his success. He eventually received a knighthood from King Charles II and was appointed the Lieutenant Governor of Jamaica. This demonstrates how incredibly closely piracy, privateering, and empire were intertwined. One man's pirate was another king's hero. By the late 17th century, piracy began a slow but certain decline. Spain was weakening, and the European powers, especially England, were eager to solidify their control and transition from chaos to profitable, regulated trade, which meant that governments stopped issuing those letters of marque. Many buccaneers found that legal careers in the increasingly powerful British Royal Navy or in the expanding merchant trade were more profitable and much safer than constant raiding. The final blow to Port Royal's dominance came tragically in 1692, when a massive earthquake and tsunami sank 2/3 of the city into the sea. After 1700, the center of pirate activity shifted eastward to the Bahama Islands. This new explosion of activity was directly fueled by the War of the Spanish Succession, which ended in 1714. When the war concluded, thousands of experienced, heavily armed privateers were suddenly unemployed. Nassau became known as the Pirate Republic, a lawless, self-governing community that openly defied colonial powers. This is the era that produced the most famous legends we know today. The terrifying Blackbeard, the cunning Charles Vane, the unfortunate Calico Jack. Historical records suggest that up to 1/3 of the pirates operating out of Nassau were of African descent. Many of them freed or escaped slaves who sought the economic opportunity and the relative equality the pirate code offered them. The major European powers, now focused on global trade dominance, could no longer tolerate this chaos. In 1717 and 1718, King George I issued a royal proclamation offering full pardons to any pirate who surrendered immediately. Many took the deal, effectively retiring. Crucially, Governor Woodes Rogers, a former privateer himself, was dispatched to Nassau to restore British control. He offered the pardon with one hand. Between 1716 and 1726, hundreds of pirates were captured and executed, often in mass public hangings meant to serve as a brutal warning. By 1721, the Pirate Republic was dismantled. The remaining pirates were hunted down, killed, or forced to seek refuge elsewhere. They were complex figures caught in the machinery of empire, economic hardship, and war. They were criminal entrepreneurs and opportunistic survivors, pioneers of democratic ideals, electing their leaders and ensuring equity in pay and benefits long before those concepts were commonplace in the wider world. That incredible blend of chaos, freedom, and radical organization is the true, fascinating legacy of the real Pirates of the Caribbean. Thanks for watching, and let me know in the comments which pirate you find most interesting. Subscribe for more deep dives into history.